In the crowded race for California's 48th Congressional District, the most articulate and tech-savvy candidate could for the first time be, wait for it, a woman. Meet newcomer and activist Rachel Payne. With a likability factor off the charts and a resume that most men would envy, ask her any question about healthcare, national defense, immigration, or local issues, and you'll be amazed by her depth of knowledge and, more importantly, her contagious passion for each topic. A longtime champion of women's rights, a former executive of Google, and now the CEO of her own artificial intelligence company, Rachel has lived all over the world, becoming fluent in 5 languages. She says she brings innovation and a pragmatic approach to the job and will draw upon her long history of working with people with opposing views to solve the many problems in this country. Fueled by her disappointment in the 2016 presidential election and an endless passion to make a difference, we sat down with her this week to learn more. Thank you for meeting with us today. Why don't we start with your background?
I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of a technology company in the artificial intelligence space. I've been in the technology industry for 20 years, and I've also been an activist since the age of 18. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I've been fighting for female empowerment all over the world, and I've served on the board of directors for multiple NGOs and companies.
What kind of activist work?
I've worked with a variety of nonprofit organizations. My first job at the age of 18 was at the Feminist Majority, and I was studying how domestic abuse cases are handled in the federal courts and in the local courts, and trying to come up with patterns for identifying how to better process domestic abuse. From there, I've worked with a variety of organizations. I served on the board of the world's largest NGO, ranked #1 in the world, which has a global reach, and we focus on economic empowerment for women, education, access to health care, and new micro businesses, so small businesses that women can run to generate income. And they're rated #1 in the world because of effectiveness and because we reach hundreds of millions of people.
Do you think you're fighting for health care for women? I'm assuming that includes Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
Do you think that's going to hurt you with getting voters here in Orange County, which tends to be more Republican?
No, actually, because 7 out of 10 Americans believe in reproductive freedom. And that includes not just access to abortion, but it also includes family planning in general and protecting women in the workplace who are pregnant and fighting for paid family leave. So when we think about all forms of reproductive freedom, that is a pillar that I've been working on and for my entire life, and I think adult life. And I think that most people in this district, while they may be Republican, that doesn't mean that they're not socially liberal or that they don't believe that there are some aspects to a woman's right to choose that they can't get behind. While most people may not necessarily choose that for themselves, they don't necessarily want to prevent someone else from choosing it.
And what attracts you to the Democrat Party?
Well, I think a big part of the platform throughout the decades that I've been a Democrat is really this notion of equity, fairness, justice, and making sure that all Americans are taken care of. And doing so, from my view, in ways that continue to be innovative and ideally sustainable and scalable. And that's where I think the Democratic Party has some opportunity to improve, looking beyond just the traditional structure of programs to something that can actually be more effective over the long run and also ensure sustainability. So I think whether we're talking about jobs or improving incomes, which is a very big problem right now in America, the Democratic Party has fought for values and ideals that really serve the broader population.
We asked her how she feels about California's new sanctuary state law, SB 54, that defies the federal government's position on federal immigration. She had this to say at the recent Candidates Forum.
83% of Americans support DACA recipients and having a clean pathway to citizenship. 83%, 67% of Republicans. I support a very clean path to citizenship, and I also support sanctuary cities, for the record.
So you support state rights over federal laws?
Well, federal law takes precedent, but there is a notion of states' rights, and there are a number of cases where states' rights should be respected. For example, when we talk about gun safety, The notion of reciprocity is something I am very much against. California has some of the best gun laws in the country. They're not perfect, there's a lot of room for improvement, but other states have more lax laws. And so reciprocity is the idea that a state that allows concealed carry overrides another state that doesn't, like California. And that means people with guns can come into California and violate our state's rights, which are designed to protect people.
What about maybe the legalization of marijuana? Is that state rights over federal law?
Well, again, sometimes states' rights are, in some ways, it's like an experiment. States have the right to draft their own legislation and formulate laws that ultimately could roll up into federal legislation. And that's what I think is amazing about America. It's like an experimentation. It allows you to try different things in different places that are locally specific and contextually relevant. And if those programs or laws are successful, then they can become federal legislation. And that is, an ideal way that this process works. I support legalization of marijuana. I think there's a lot to be learned by the way that it's being implemented in a variety of states. I don't think any model is perfect yet. I think decriminalization is really important for a variety of reasons, health being one of them. There's a lot of health benefits, and I think the way that currently marijuana is classified as a Schedule II does not allow us to reap the full benefits of what it can provide. It also means that there's a lot of businesses that are operating underground, which makes it less safe, it makes it harder to regulate, and those taxable revenues they're not being collected. And that's an opportunity too. So I support legalization of marijuana, and the rules around how that is governed are really important. I don't think we figured it all out yet, and that's why federal policy should actually observe and defer to states' rights here, because we need to learn more before we can really take federal action. And right now, the issue of marijuana and cannabis law in particular is being politicized by Jeff Sessions. And what we're seeing is the rise of pharmaceutical approaches to the health treatments at a much higher price than natural cannabis treatments. And that is being supported as Schedule I, which is, makes you wonder, what are the politics behind this? Why are pharmaceutical companies able to promote the benefits of the drugs that they're creating, whereas natural treatments are actually being classified as, Schedule II, federal offenses. So it's a big problem. And I think what we really want to focus on are, how do we help people with the health benefits? How do we make sure it's regulated? And how do we ensure that the state can yield some benefit from taxable revenue?
Speaking of drug use, I want to talk about sober living homes. I know here in the 48th District, we have just been inundated with sober living homes on almost every street, it seems. Bringing a lot of issues. What are your thoughts or plans for that?
The fact that there's a term called Rehab Riviera tells you something about how the notion of sober living homes has been exploited to take advantage of the vulnerable and to create ways in which people are gaming the system, particularly around insurance billing, but at the cost of lives. So real people are being exploited in ways that are just unconscionable. And so with sober living homes, the idea of them is great. There's a transitionary housing that allows people to live in a clean facility as they transition into, the real world, right? Mm-hmm. And gives them an opportunity to live in an environment that doesn't expose them to the risks. If that were the case, it would be a great idea. The problem is that this is, again, where federal policy and state and local laws don't interact well. And because the way in which federal policy works, it's preventing local areas like Costa Mesa, which is bearing the brunt of the sober living explosion and exploitation. It prevents Costa Mesa from properly regulating this. And that shouldn't be the case. What we shouldn't have is a situation where unlicensed operators, who themselves might also be addicts, by the way, are taking advantage of addicts and in fact causing a loss of life. That's the wrong outcome. What we do need are treatment centers. We do need the ability to license and regulate. We do need monitoring and oversight. And we need to identify those areas of conflict in policy that prevent local communities from properly regulating.
Now, what's on the campaign trail out there, what are the biggest complaints you're hearing, and what are your plans to address them?
There's a lot of complaints. Part of it has to do with the representation that we have today. A lot of people believe that Dana is out of touch, that he's distracted by Russia, that he may not even be capable of the job anymore, and they're concerned about his motivations. You know, people have asked me, who is he serving? Is he serving Putin or is he serving us? And you don't know. You just don't know that answer. A lot of people concerned about their health and whether they can afford to get sick. 78% of the people in the 48th district have a pre-existing condition. That's terrifying when you think about the efforts that the 115th Congress has been pursuing to roll people off of insurance and to attack the ACA. So I think access to affordable, high-quality health insurance is probably a #1 issue for most people. For younger people, it might not be. I think for younger people, it's this combination of a high debt burden because of college and the lack of prospects for good paying jobs. And, you know, I come from tech, and that's where people always assume that these jobs are plentiful and they're paying well. But the problem is there's this big gap between the jobs that are available and the people who can fill them, because not enough of our students are graduating with the requisite foundation to take those jobs. And it requires a college education, etc. But college is so expensive that it's out of reach for most families who are middle class and working class. And that's a problem in this country. We cannot afford to let our kids fall behind, because students, they are what makes America competitive in the global labor force. And if we don't invest in our students and allow them a pathway to an affordable education, then we as a country fall behind. You see, I say this because I came from a working class family, and I paid for my own education, and I left college with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans. And that was with a Pell Grant and Stafford loans and scholarships. I had dozens of scholarships that I fought for. But kids today, they don't get a Pell Grant or Stafford loans, and they don't even have the ability to refinance their student loan because of this Congress. That means they're left with a really high interest rate that follows them for the rest of their life. Who would do that? Why not let students refinance their loans? I did multiple times. It's unfair, and it actually eats away at our future innovation and competitiveness as a country. So what I would like to do is bring back the programs that work, that ensure that every student in America that tries hard, that works hard, that has dreams and aspirations can live to their fullest potential. And a big part of that pathway out of poverty and to success is education.
And what about, you had mentioned the healthcare costs. Do you support a single payer system?
I'm really excited about, again, the states' models that are emerging that allow us to experiment with different single-payer options. So with SB 562, we have an opportunity to test out what a federal policy around single-payer could look like. We know that there will be problems. In tech, we call it a prototype. You launch something and then you improve it. ACA is like that. It's a prototype. It's the first thing we've done. It's not perfect. There's a lot of room for improvement, but you iterate, you make it better, and then you scale it even more broadly. And with healthcare, the irony that this Congress is missing is that the more people that you have covered, the greater your ability to pool risk, because diversification is really critical in how you pool risk. And that allows you to run a model that's more effective. The other advantage of single payer, potentially, is the ability to have both economies of scale, which can bring down per unit pricing, and the ability to negotiate because you have larger bargaining power. So in Japan, I mean, by the way, this exists all over the world. It's not like it's a novelty. It's everywhere, all over the world. So in Japan, they were able to negotiate lower prices on treatments that involved MRI. So MRI scans were exorbitant. And they just made it a requirement that it had to cost less. So guess what happened? Japan created the world's best MRI equipment, which is now some of the cheapest equipment in the world because of that mandate. Well, we could do the same thing. We're America. And so what we're not using are principles of market forces in order to demand not just better healthcare pricing, but better health outcomes. And right now we rank among the lowest in the world on critical health outcomes, from maternity and early childhood health conditions, all the way to addiction and treatment and mental health services. We shouldn't be ranked among the lowest in the industrialized world.
Now let's jump to unfunded liabilities. Now, the unfunded liabilities have been growing since 2008, and it's falling to the cities to make up the difference for their employees. How do you plan to address that?
This is a real problem, especially here in California, and it's something that we need to think about broadly because there's a lot of implications for everyone, both the families and the workers involved, as well as the institutions who are providing those pensions. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we're not taking away something that was promised to the people who've been working their lives with that benefit in mind. This needs restructuring. And we need to rethink how to make programs more sustainable. And that's, by the way, that's a lesson across the board in government. Like, there's so many ways that we need to make things more sustainable. But what we can't do is pull the rug out from people who've worked their entire career and are now looking forward to retirement and suddenly get a surprise. That's unfair and it's unjust, and we need to make sure that we are taking care of the people who've been working their whole life, who are now at an age where they're vulnerable. But for the next generation, we need to restructure this. And we need to look at how it's paid in and to whom it's paid out. And I don't think it's fair, again, to surprise cities with an obligation that they weren't planning for. I think there are ways to graduate it in and to do so in a manner that has a shared cost burden. But what we also have to be mindful of is that we're not taking away from the next generation in order to pay out those commitments. And that's another worry that I have. Are we taking away from students and their education in order to pay for health insurance? Well, guess what? If we had a more affordable health insurance program nationally, maybe it's single payer, we wouldn't have that same exorbitant cost. There would be a way to balance that out. So I think part of the problem is that we have a system where we're not addressing some of the root causes, which is spiraling healthcare costs, and we're just assuming those costs as they're growing, rather than looking at how do we restructure that entire system.
So when you get elected, what committees do you plan on joining?
There are several, and some of them are more noteworthy than others, but I care a lot about housing and health, and making sure that we are being equitable in how we're thinking about homelessness and the effects that homelessness has on communities all over the country, and looking at how do we scale really effective programs to address not just the symptom of homelessness, but the root causes of homelessness, which vary. It could be everything from, again, addiction, mental health, temporary displacement, domestic abuse, veterans returning that have no support, all sorts of reasons why that occurs. So I'd like to bring some of those understanding of programs that work to that committee. Dana Rohrabacher currently serves on the Technology, Science, and Space Subcommittee. As a technologist, I, of course, would like to be on that committee. In my first debate with Dana Rohrabacher, he mentioned to me that he believes that climate change is a hoax because when you Google climate change hoax, you get a bunch of results. And I explained to him, well, as a Google executive, former Google executive, that's not how it works. And he said, wow, you should be on the technology subcommittee. And I said, you know what, maybe I should. So that's one I would like to do. I have worked all over the world and lived in multiple countries. I speak multiple languages, so foreign relations, foreign affairs is very important to me. That's a committee that I really would like to support with my experience, both in the private sector as well as in the NGO sector, and working with the State Department and USAID and UN Women and a number of other multilateral institutions. So I think I would have a lot to bring there.
So what languages do you speak?
Je parle français, espagnol et japonés. Ohayou gozaimasu. Hajimemashite, dozo yoroshiku. Buenos días. Me llamo Raquel. Mucho gusto. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Es muy importante. I speak Japanese, French, Spanish, and a little bit of Swahili.
Oh, Swahili. I was Did not recognize that one.
Asante sana.
So why are you leaving? I mean, you work in the tech industry, so you probably make a nice paycheck. Why would you be leaving that to go to Congress where you're going to be making less than you make now?
Well, I don't know if this is necessarily an economic decision. I think this is a sense of personal responsibility. When the election happened, a lot of people were devastated by the results for a variety of reasons, and I did everything I could. I, went to marches. I donated. My company was a sponsor of the National Women's March. I've really tried to get involved in every way I can. I helped set up a local Democratic club here as a founding member, the Elisa Niguel Democratic Club, and that wasn't enough. And I knew I could do more. And, I looked at who's running, and I was excited by the caliber of talent all over Orange County. But practically speaking, I didn't see people who had experience that was very relevant, who had been working on these issues and who had been awake for more than the last year. I've been working for 20 years on a lot of these issues, and I have very grounded experience in what works and what doesn't. And I also understand how policymaking works. And when I meet with members of Congress, we immediately get into a collaborative mode where we talk about what kind of legislation we can co-author to make the world a better place, to make America a better place. And this ultimately comes from a sense of responsibility because I know I have the capacity to do more. I've been in technology for 20 years. I love it. It's an amazing industry, but I've done it. And for right now, I think it's more important that I contribute my talents, my passion, and whatever resources I can bring to bear to address the problem of democracy in America.
Okay, just one final question. Why should the voters pick you over Rohrabacher?
Well, that choice should be very clear because in the 30 years that Rohrabacher has been in office, there's very little he can point to that he's done for this district. We are a net exporter of dollars. We give out more from this district than we get back. Second, Rohrabacher has one of the lowest legislative effectiveness scores of anyone in Congress. When I was on the Hill meeting with members of Congress, they said, he must be really involved in your community because he never shows up here. And if you ask people in this community, they're not sure where he is either. So I think Dana has done a disservice to the people here. He's out of touch. They don't know what he stands for. And outside of surfing and cannabis, it's unclear what he's done. So in my view, you want someone who can enter the office ready to work, who has experience to get the job done. I understand what it's like to work across the aisle because as an executive in technology and as the CEO of my own startup, I have had to work with organizations and companies that one might consider competitive, frenemies, so to speak. And we have to learn how to get along. We have to learn how to get things done even though we have disparate interests and sometimes a lot of competitiveness. But when you can find the middle ground and figure out how do you create value in the areas where you can align strategically, you can get a lot more done. And I believe that this district needs someone who can work with both sides, find common ground, and take that middle lane, which is often rooted in innovation and new ideas and a pragmatic approach that makes economic sense. And that I've been doing my entire life.